In continuation to the lecture series on a thorough perception on liquid dosage form, today we will be touching upon the concluding aspect of the topic emulsions under biphasic liquid dosage forms. I am Dr. Hema Chaudhary from K.R. Mangalam University, Gurugram. As already briefed that emulsions are biphasic liquid dosage forms meant for either oral use or external use. As already discussed in the subsequent series of the topic emulsions, we have already touched upon different strategies and different aspects with respect to the formulations of emulsion dosage form. So just a quick recap on what has already been covered under the lecture series on emulsions. We have already discussed the definition of emulsions, classification of emulsions, wherein we have touched more in detail with regard to liquid in liquid meant for oral use, that is emulsions. The learning outcomes of the previous lectures have been with respect to definition of emulsions, classification of emulsions, emulsifying agents and test for identification of type of emulsions. Also, we had touched upon the introductory part of methods of preparation. So, in continuation to the concept of methods of preparation of emulsions, it is already understood that emulsions are biphasic systems having two immiscible phases, one being oil and the other being water. Now, they have to be made one single system or uniform system by the addition of an emulsifying agent. So, broadly we can say that the components which goes in making a formulation of emulsions are drug, oil phase and additives, under which we also talk about water and emulgents. As already introduced in my last lecture regarding different strategies or methodologies which can be adapted for preparation of emulsions, they are either bottle method, dry gum method, wet gum method and in general other methods. As discussed, bottle method is a very simple and a method of choice whenever emulsions have to be prepared extemporaneously, as they involve shaking within the final container, which is a glass bottle. This method is of use only when volatile oils have to be emulsified. Volatile oils or oleaginous substances having low viscosity, they can be made into emulsions by this technique, and the utility of this technique is limited. The methodology goes as wherein we take the oil phase and mix it with an emulgent in a dry bottle. Now, the care should be taken that the bottle should be dry, otherwise the proportion of water will get disturbed. Once the oil and the gum has been shaken in a dry bottle, water is added gradually and the bottle is again shaken vigorously. Due to this, the emulsion is formed. So, as specified, this method is of limited utility. We have other methodology which is in general referred as gum emulsion method. Under this strategy, we can either adapt dry gum approach or wet gum approach. Now, basically as the name specifies, it is gum emulsions, wherein the natural gums or the source of emulsifying agent is from natural source, which is employed as the emulsifying agent. Now, gum emulsions are generally preferred for extemporaneous preparations, whereas when emulsions have to be prepared on large scale, gums have limited use. Now, as we are talking about extemporaneous preparations, as it's a dispensing practice, one has to understand that out of the gums available, acacia and tragacant are the popular choices. Now, whenever we talk with respect to gum emulsions, it is to be understood that gum acacia is generally used until otherwise mentioned in the prescription order. So, gum acacia is the most commonly opted emulgent from natural source, especially for extemporaneous preparations. But Its limitation is that it itself is a weak emulgent. When there are multiple oils in the formulation, then a mixture of gums can be taken as emulsifying agents. Now, the main purpose of using gums in general is by the mechanism that they form multi-molecular interfacial films, whereas acacia, when if it is taken in specific, it acts by forming a monomolecular interfacial film. And one more advantage of taking gums is that it increases the viscosity of the dispersion medium. The significance of having an adequate viscosity of the dispersion medium is in order to have better shelf life of the product. This aspect will be covered under stability aspect of emulsion. And also the main advantage of using acacia gum is it requires comparatively less mechanical energy, whereas otherwise contrary gum emulsions require more of mechanical energy. Since it is extemporaneous preparation and the quantity which is prepared is comparatively less, so in that context gum acacia can be the preference. Now, whenever gum acacia or in general gums are used as emulsifying agent, we have to adapt the strategy of making a pre-emulsion, or we generally refer it as a primary emulsion. It is to be noted here that primary emulsion concept is generally considered only when we are talking about gum emulsions. So, in order to understand the primary emulsion concept, it can be said that it is the preliminary phase of emulsion preparation. Now, once the primary emulsion is formed, the primary emulsion can be diluted with the external phase to produce the required volume of the preparation. Now, here basically what the concept is, a part of oil with part of emulgent and part of water is taken to prepare the primary emulsion. This approach will help in producing a stable emulsion. Now, here the volume of liquid is comparatively small, so the shearing force can be attained by using a simple mortar and pestle. This table shows the ratio of oil, water, gum to be taken in order to prepare a primary emulsion. Now, the main concept to be understood here is the nature of the oil which is to be emulsified. We have different categories of oils. If the oil is from the fixed oil category, the primary emulsion formula to be followed is in the ratio of 4:2:1, wherein 4 parts of oil, 2 refers to parts of water and 1 part of gum. If we are talking in context of mineral oil, for example, if liquid paraffin emulsion has to be formulated, then the primary emulsion formula would be following the ratio of oil, water, gum as 3:2:1 respectively. If the oil under study is volatile oils, then an approach wherein the ratio would be maintained at 2:2:1 with respect to oil, water, gum respectively. And finally, if the oil is oleoresin, in that case the ratio would be 1:2:1 with respect to oil, water, gum respectively. Now, if we observe this table, there are 2-3 things which one has to understand. First and foremost, it is the oil part which is to be taken into account. Based on the nature and the quantity of oil, the ratio of water and gum is decided. When we talk about volatile oils and oleoresins, if you see the table, it requires more amount of gum and water to make primary emulsion because they have low viscosity in comparison to fixed oils and mineral oils. So, understanding the primary emulsion formula, we can have 2 approaches for the preparation. One is called as dry gum method and the other is called as wet gum method. Whenever we talk about dry gum method, the methodology is that as per the primary emulsion formula, the calculated quantity of oil and gum is taken in a dry mortar and pestle and triturated to get lump free dispersion. So, the first stage is to take a mortar and pestle which has to be thoroughly clean and dry, weighed quantity of oil and acacia is transferred and it should be triturated to order to get a free dispersion, lump free dispersion. Now care should be taken that the trituration should be unidirectional, either clockwise or anti-clockwise. The reason behind this is in order to bring about uniform distribution of oil and uniform coating of the gum on each globule of the oil. Once the free dispersion is formed, then the portion of water which is as per the primary emulsion formula has to be measured and added to the mortar with trituration, unidirectional movement until a clicking sound is heard. The clicking sound will be heard when the primary emulsion stage is complete. At this stage, the trituration should be stopped and in another beaker, other additives of the formulation along with remaining volume of the vehicle, that is water, if it is oil in water phase, has to be dissolved and the ingredients have to be mixed drop by drop into the mortar with trituration in the same direction which was adapted while preparing primary emulsion. And ultimately when the volume is made up, it will be observed that it will result in the formation of a milky white emulsion. This indicates the emulsion being prepared is of high quality and stability. The second approach which one can adapt is by wet gum method. So here the difference is, in contrary to the dry gum method, the calculated quantity of water and acacia is taken. Instead of oil, here water is taken with acacia in a dry mortar and pestle. Remaining steps are the same. Trituration has to be started in unidirection to get a lump free dispersion. So basically it results in a mucilage because water is less viscous and when a gum is added to it, though its viscosity increases, it becomes mucilaginous in nature. When this step is completed, the remaining the oil part of the primary emulsion is added to the mortar by trituration in unidirection aspect and it is triturated until a clicking sound is heard. Until the clicking sound is heard, trituration should be continuous. Once this is attained, the trituration is stopped and similar to the previous method in a separate beaker, other additives are added in remaining volume of water and added to this mucilaginous mixture in the mortar and pestle, again resulting in formation of a milky white emulsion. So dry gum method and wet gum method is on the same lines, the difference being that initially in dry gum method oil is taken along with the gum, whereas in wet gum method it is water which is taken with the gum, oil is added at a later phase. Now once we have understood the methods of preparation of emulsion, the next challenge would be for a formulation chemist to understand what is the stability aspect of emulsion. Now this is in sync with the syllabus laid by the Pharmacy Council of India that once we have discussed methods of preparation, we need to touch upon stability aspects of emulsions and the strategies adapted to overcome the same. Now whenever we talk about emulsions, as we recall the definition of emulsions, it goes that they are thermodynamically unstable systems, because it is bringing two immiscible phases together and those two immiscible phases are blended together by the help of a third substance which is an emulgent. So in case a stable emulsion is formed, the ideal properties by which we can conclude that the formulation is stable is on the basis that the formulation should have uniform distribution or dispersion of mono-sized droplets of internal phase. So this is the preliminary requirement to call the preparation stable. It is that the internal phase, whatever it is, whether oil or water, it has to be as a mono-sized droplet, a very fine size droplet, mono-size individual entities, and it should be dispersed uniformly throughout the dispersion medium. If this condition is seen, then the system is referred as a stable preparation. The second criteria to call it as a stable formulation is internal phase droplets may have tendency, in case the internal phase is oil, the oil droplets may come closer to form coalescence, which can form a cream either on the surface of the preparation or bottom. Now, even if there is a tendency of cream formation, it should be in such a way that the cream layer will undergo redistribution on shaking. If this approach is seen, then even then we can conclude that the prepared emulsion is a stable formulation. The third condition to call the preparation stable is the prepared emulsion should remain in its type. That is, if we are aiming to prepare oil in water type and we have attained it, after some time it should remain as oil in water type and it should not transform into water in oil type. That is, it should not change its purpose from disperse phase to dispersion medium and vice versa. If these conditions are satisfied, then it can be concluded that the prepared emulsion is a stable formulation. Now, the challenges which we see after formulation of emulsion is especially that in case the ideal qualities are not fulfilled, we will see instability seeping into the system, and the instability could be due to any of the reasons, such as the first can be called as cracking of emulsions. Cracking is synonymously also referred as coalescence of emulsion. The second approach would be creaming of emulsion. So, whenever we see this, we say that there is an instability problem in the formulation. And finally, the third stability issue which we generally face after formulating emulsion is phase inversion. So, we have to understand each type of problem with respect to stability, why it occurs and how we can overcome this problem, or what strategy should we adapt to avoid these problems. So, taking one by one, the first being cracking of emulsion. Now, cracking, as I said, it is also called in general as coalescence of emulsion. So, whenever the word, if we understand as in general terminology in common English, cracking is something called as breaking. If we simplify in a normal English terminology, we can refer this word as breaking. So, when there is breaking, when the two phases of emulsions are going their own way, they are not staying together, and the system shows that there are two phases which are separating off, because already these systems are thermodynamically unstable, which are being made into stable systems temporarily by addition of emulsifying agent. So, if we see this tendency where both the phases are separating and the system is breaking into two phases, we can call it as cracking. To understand the definition aspect, we generally understand that whenever two or more globules of internal phase, that is the disperse phase, come together and they form coalescence, they come together and join together to form coalescence, and this on larger building will ultimately separate as a distinct layer. So, initially it will look like a creamy layer, and if this continues, then also we can say that the separation has become distinct and we can see a thick layer and a transparent layer in the system, which is also referred as cracking of the system or cracking of the emulsion. The other way to understand cracking or define cracking is simply calling it as separation of immiscible phases as distinct layers. So, these two definitions are entirely to be understood very clearly because they are two different concepts. The first definition tries to signify that it is the problem with the disperse phase wherein the particles which had to remain as uniform dispersion throughout the dispersion medium are no longer remaining as individual entities. They have started coming closer to each other and forming coalescence, and because of which the coalescence is started to be seen as a distinct layer. So, that is the major problem with disperse phase. And the second definition is when we are understanding that two phases, that is oil and water, are appearing as two distinct phases. In both the ways, we understand that the system has cracked. Thank you.